Anxiety. It's a normal response to stressful situations, but when it becomes pervasive and unrelenting, the results can be debilitating. Our next two guests know all too well the effects of anxiety. Joining us now, Daniel Smith. He's a writer and author of Monkey Mind, a memoir of anxiety, and Darlene Wierskie-DeVoe. She is a leader of the Milton chapter of Parents for Children's Mental Health. We want to remind you that we'd like you to be part of this conversation. Our producers are hosting a live chat right now with a representative from the mental health hotline Connects Ontario. It's on our homepage, theagenda.tvo.org. You can also join us via Twitter. Please use the hashtags MHMatters or AgendaTVO. Nice to meet you two. Thanks for coming in tonight. Daniel, you wrote the memoir all about this. So what is life for you like when anxiety is an issue?
It's like trying to do your normal routine while in a pool, or a pool of Jell-O. That's sometimes what it feels like. For me, I mean, anxiety is, there are different forms of anxiety. There are different ways that anxiety can manifest itself. For me, it's very much has to do with thoughts. My thoughts become doom-laden. Everything seems like a risk. I get distracted very easily by what could go wrong, what has gone wrong already, so that just kind of struggling to see through all those thoughts to what I need to do and what I want to be doing, to see other people around me, becomes enormously difficult and really exhausting. Exhaustion is really one of the primary experiences when I'm struggling with anxiety.
Do you know what brings it on?
At this point, I think it's habit. I mean, I've been struggling with anxiety since I'm a kid. I don't struggle like I used to, but there was a period of my life in my 20s and my late teens when anxiety was really a daily experience. I don't know what brings it on other than that I've been doing it for so long. I've been thinking in that way that my mind just falls into those old patterns. That's the kind of mind I have. It's an anxious mind, and when it started, why it started, concerns me less than how I stop it from continuing.
Let me ask you about how anxious your mind is right now. You are in a television studio talking to thousands of people with cameras and lights, and you've never been in this studio before. Are you anxious right now?
Not greatly anxious. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people. You're a very comforting presence. So I've discovered that right from the front. But strangely, I'm not. Anxiety can be a very strange and curious thing. Of course, public speaking or doing appearances like this, speaking in front of a lot of people or in a studio, would make a lot of people panic-stricken. But for me, performance of any kind has always reduced the anxiety. And I think that's because anxiety is related to time. When you're anxious, you're either thinking forward to what's going to go wrong, or you're thinking backward to what's already gone wrong and will therefore make the future go even wronger. But when you're talking to someone in a scenario where you really have to speak articulately, it forces you into the present, forces you to be mindful in a way that, for me at least, reduces my anxiety. Afterwards, I'm sure I will worry about all the things that I said wrong and shouldn't have said.
Yeah, but every guest does that.
Well, every guest does that, but oh no, but I will lose sleep for 48 hours. It'll be pronounced.
Please don't. You're doing marvelously already. Okay, Darlene, your experience with this issue actually has nothing to do with you. It has to do with somebody you know, right?
That's right.
Tell us about it.
It's my daughter. My daughter was diagnosed with severe social anxiety when she was 4.
When she was 4?
4, yeah. Very, very young on. The world was just overwhelming. From a very young age, it was overwhelming from a sensory perspective, everything. So she'd walk into...
How would that manifest itself?
Oh, she'd walk into a room. She couldn't walk into a room. She would walk into a room behind, tailoring behind us, behind our legs, or crying, constant crying. And that's sort of at the point when she was about 18 months, way past that colicky stage. I went to my doctor and said, okay, if there's something wrong with her medically, then we need to figure it out. And if there's something wrong that I'm perhaps exacerbating, some behavior that I'm instigating, then we got to figure it out too, because she's just so unhappy. No matter what the circumstance is, no matter where we're going, she's always so unhappy. And the crying, it was just continual crying. And when they're that young, there's no way to articulate what's going on. So you're trying your best as a parent to figure out and acknowledge how to support and help. And there's absolutely no clue.
Did you get to the bottom of it eventually?
We did. It took a while though.
How long did it take?
Probably about 2 years.
Of constant going to medical
Yeah,
professionals?
Yeah, and part of that problem was, you know, the appointment was supposed to last for half an hour, but because of the debilitating anxiety, an occupational therapist, there was no way that they could deduce what was going on. So these appointments ended up taking 3 and 4 and 5 months because it was a matter of just reintroducing that same person over and over again until she had a little bit of a comfort level in order to be able to make any sort of assessment or judgment. So it was a long and tedious process.
Was she ever happy?
Occasionally, but the moments were so sparse that it not really. My mother passed away when she was about 3, and it was shortly after that where there was a moment where we were all sitting down as a family on the ground, and she laughed. She took a block and she threw it, and she laughed, and we all stopped. There was a laugh. Oh my gosh, she laughed. It was the first time we audibly, you know, and really trying to do something, you know, to cause us all to laugh. I'm going to play with you. And it was that playfulness that we had never seen before, that side that we had never seen before.
Which ironically showed up at a moment of deep grief for you.
Well, you know what? I think it was a matter of just a lifting. It was a lifting. It was, we had gone through a lot, and it was just, I think the stress in the household just sort of lifted as well. And she was able to, there was some sort of easement, I guess, of feelings, and she picked up on it and was able to start opening up. And that was the very first time that we really sort of started to see the Sydney that we were hoping that could be.
How many kids you got?
I've got 2.
And where is she in the order?
She's second, so I've got an older son as well.
So, well, I mean, 2 kids in a household is kind of stressful enough sometimes.
Yeah.
And when the second kid is more challenging than most,
Yeah.
do I assume that your parenting experience has been less than blissful?
Yeah, it's been challenging. It has, in every sense of the word, challenged every ounce and fiber of my being to a certain extent at any given moment, because you're constantly on the lookout. You're constantly trying to maneuver 2 children's feelings, making sure that, you know, one gets enough attention, but how can you give that other child enough attention when, you know, clearly there's a medical issue that needs to be looked after with your other child. And, you know, it puts stress on your marriage, it puts stress on your friendships, in every way, shape, and form, you know, affects
Well, because no
every
one
part
wants
of
to
your life.
invite you over, do they?
And you know what, it's the misunderstanding, right? We continually brought her into situations where she would sometimes spend hours in a corner with us crying, but we just continually try, and I shouldn't say that, that sounds bad. Yeah, we brought her in and made her cry the whole time, but we just continually exposed her. We tried as best as possible not to let life stop us. So we just continually exposed her bit by bit, and we try, and if it was too overwhelming, then we have to leave. But there was that misunderstanding of, well, we know what's wrong with her. We need to do something for her while we're trying our best.
Let me explore whether it was pharmacology or what that eventually got some peace and quiet in both of your lives. How about for you? Are you on medication?
I am, but I'm not sure it does much of anything, frankly. I mean, and in the past when I've been on medication, what it's done best, I think, is not stop the anxiety, which isn't something I really want to do anyway. I mean, anxiety it's an emotion. We need anxiety, or we'd get hit by cars crossing the street. But it's kind of cut the peaks off the experience, or like put a net in the well so that I don't fall down to the bottom where I'm so consumed by anxiety all the time that I can't see anything else. It's kind of you know, like a safety measure. The thing that really helped me, and I'd been to a lot of therapists when I was really struggling deeply with anxiety from the time I was, I don't know, about 16 into my mid-20s. And a lot of the therapists didn't do a great deal of good for me until I found someone who I found out later was very cognitively oriented, had trained in cognitive behavior therapy. And this helped me to kind of articulate what was going on in my mind, and to question it and get some handle on changing how my mind works, actually taking some agency and using my own will and actively combating how my habits of mind. It was only when I did that the anxiety really started to diminish. I mean, I stopped, it's something that you have to keep doing. But that and meditation, those 2 things, because they're both so focused on mindfulness, on knowing what's going on inside your head.
So it's a package of things that eventually
It's
help.
a package of things, but the things that have helped there's a common ingredient for me. And I think it's different for a lot of people. So I don't think that what works for me is a prescription across the board.
Sure.
But for me, it's something that allows me to exert my will on my own mind.
Daniel, what does your mom do for a living?
My mom is a psychotherapist who specializes in anxiety.
Now, we run into these kind of ironies all the time when we're doing these programs, but was
I
that
don't
a
think this is an
helper?
irony. This is the very opposite, probably.
Well, was that a help or a hindrance to getting solutions for you?
Well, it was both in that it caused the problem and then helped me to overcome it. I mean, my mother, and this is not giving anything away since it's in the book, my mother became a therapist who specializes in anxiety disorders because she had suffered from anxiety for years, and worse than I ever have, I think, hearing her talk about it. She had crippling panic attacks almost every day for decades. And then eventually she found a therapy that helped, and she went back to school, I believe, in her 40s to become a clinical social worker and become a therapist, a very good one, from what I understand.
So did they think that you inherited this from her?
By they, if you mean by they, me.
Medical profession. Oh, okay.
I mean, I suspect that I don't really know. I mean, it's not like there's an obvious genetic marker for anxiety. I'm sure there are markers, but I'm sure it's a combination of genetics, of having a mother who struggled with anxiety, who tried to hide it, who tried to not let it out so that her kids didn't see the anxiety and the panic, but you can't hide it. I mean, you could feel it. You could feel it in the hugs. You can feel it in, the holding of hands. Her worry about me was, to my mind now, excessive.
Do you have siblings?
I have 2 older brothers, yeah.
So you're the baby as well.
I'm the baby as well. Yeah, and, it's a family problem.
Well, speaking of which, you were the caregiver, and then what happened?
And then 2009, I had my own issues where I thought for sure I was going to see that white light. I thought that was it. I was never going to see my kids again. I thought I was having a heart attack. I had suffered from panic attacks when I was younger, occasionally, but I think for the most part, I survived. I just blew it off as best as I could, but 2009, my whole world came tumbling down. And I went from, being able to drive the kids to school, being home all by myself, working part-time, and everything just totally diminished under my feet.
Do you know what brought that on?
I'm pretty sure we started trauma therapy with my children, and the first component was the parental component, where you discuss your own past and your own sort of shadows. And I think in divulging all of my past and having that opportunity to finally really address it, that box got open, and boy, oh boy, did it ever come welling out, because everything, I couldn't be left alone any longer. I could barely leave the house most days. My husband had to start working from home. Friends, I couldn't drive to visit friends. Friends had to come see me. Yeah, it was a year and a half of my life that was, a chunk that was gone.
How are you now?
I'm much better. I'm much better. I fight, for every question. If I ever have a question about what's going on with me, I make sure that I find an answer. I'm really all about healing and healing myself and my children.
You still married?
I am, and you know what, oddly enough and thankfully enough, our marriage, I know it can go one of 2 ways, right? You can either go the way of totally separating from each other. My husband is my rock, and our marriage got so much stronger because of it, and I think it was largely to do with the fact that I allowed him and wanted him to help. And I wasn't afraid. I'd always not really asked for help. I kind of did everything on my own. I was an only child, and so I just did it all on my own. And I decided to kind of let go of that thought and let somebody else take the reins and take care of me.
And how old's your daughter now?
She is 10.
How's she doing?
She is doing amazing. Still has her moments, for sure. We had one of those yesterday. I left the house in the morning and didn't say goodbye to her, and her whole morning and her whole afternoon were completely crippled by that change in routine. But for the large part, the confidence is starting to build each year, each school year. The confidence is starting to build. The relationships and the friendships that she didn't have earlier on are starting to build, and it really is. She's sort of coming into her own, which is amazing.
And how are you doing now?
I'm doing all right. It comes and goes. It hasn't been in that really dark place for a while now. I think mostly just because I haven't allowed it to get that bad. I kind of, as you were saying, just keep a close watch on it, because the consequences of not are terrible. I mean, you know, I have friends, I have family, I have loved ones. I don't want to get to the point where when I'm so anxious, it's like being locked into yourself. It's all you can think about. It's like being stuck in your own head so radically that you can't really love other people. And I do not want that to happen ever again.
You are both really gutsy to come and help us understand all of what you've been going through here. We want to broaden the discussion now, though, because we've got a couple of other experts on the other side of the table who we want to hear from as well on this issue. So let's do that. Let's broaden our discussion. And welcome Zindel Segal. He's head of Cognitive Behavior Therapy Clinic at CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And Judith Laposa, who's a psychologist in the Anxiety Disorders Clinic, also at CAMH. And welcome to you two. Welcome back to you, I guess, Zindel. You've been
Thanks,
here before.
Steve.
First time for you, Judith. Thank you for coming in. I just want to start by getting some first impressions. You've heard two stories here, which I suspect are not that atypical from what you hear. Judith, first impressions about what you heard.
Well, it's definitely a commonality between the two of you of having some familial component. That's definitely one thing that I heard. I was also really encouraged to hear you both talk about the idea of exposure, of purposely saying, you know what, I'm not going to let this take hold of my life. I know there's some things that I can do to make this better, and gradually, step by step, starting to push that wall back. You know, one of the things about anxiety is your world progressively gets smaller and smaller and smaller, as I'm sure you can relate. So making sure that you can start pushing those things back and start expanding your life for it to be the life that you're wanting to be living is so important.
Zindel.
You know, at the outset, you talked about how depression can sometimes eclipse anxiety as a legitimate disorder, but I think from what we've heard from Darlene and Daniel, it's clear that the suffering and the impairment and the need to find a way to get through it is on par with any other serious mental disorder. So I think that
Absolutely.
when we hear these stories, we do understand that people are struggling in their own way to find means of looking after themselves and loved ones. And that's a significant message for this whole episode and everything else that we'll be talking about. That's what was the impression left with me.
We have a bit of a list here that we want to share. This is from your organization, CAMH, the types of anxiety disorders. And this is what we're talking about, and it includes phobias, panic disorder with or without agoraphobia, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, acute stress disorder, and of course one we've heard so much about with all of the wars that have happened in the world over the last decade, post-traumatic stress disorder. One more bit of information here. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States. It affects 40 million adults in the US. That's 18% of the population. And to note, the Canadian Community Health Survey on Mental Health will be releasing its statistics at some point this year. StatsCan is going to bring our statistics up to date, so we'll get a better picture of what's going on north of the border. But are, Judith, the various anxiety disorders as common as depression?
Well, if you look at the anxiety disorders as a class, so you listed a whole bunch of different names. If you lump them all together, it's usually about 1 in 4. So 25% of people in their lifetime will have an anxiety disorder. So as a class of disorders, that would be more common than depression. But if you separate out those anxiety disorders, so for example, panic disorder is about 1 or 2% of the population. Obsessive compulsive disorder is about 2.5%. In contrast to something like social phobia, which has been upwards of 13% of the population. And depression would kind of fit in between those two endpoints.
Do you want to give us just a good understanding of the distinction between depression and that which we're talking about today? What's the difference?
Well, it's easy to think of differences because we're talking about an anxiety disorder and depression, but in fact, there's a lot of comorbidity. In other words, sometimes they both show up. And you'll have a sequence where perhaps a person is anxious and then gets depressed because they get demoralized or things progress. But one of the differences is that in depression, there's more of an encounter with a kind of physical and mental shutdown. Fatigue, energy, sleep, appetite, these things get suppressed, and one of the challenges in depression is to help raise them up to normative levels of functioning. In anxiety, and once again, it's a bit of a caricature, the encounter is with something that is very activating and fearful. And so you get a lot of activity in the service of avoiding, escaping, not wanting to feel certain things. And then a lot of the therapeutic tasks involve being able to re-engage with those activities so that the therapeutic learning of exposure and anxiety can habituate.
I'm just trying to imagine the distinction, I mean, as a professional, how you would make the distinction between one or the other. They sound like there's just an awful lot of overlap in these two things.
Well, there is, and Daniel spoke about fatigue, and fatigue is also one of the symptoms in depression.
Right.
But as you start to go through the list, for example, in depression, some of the important pathognomic signs involve suicidal thinking, problems with appetite. These things may not feature as strongly in an anxiety disorder.
How do you tell, Judith, if somebody, let's take the example of a child. You know, kids act up all the time. Kids act strangely all the time. How does one tell whether a child is going through a genuine panic attack or an anxiety disorder versus they're just really badly behaved today and determined to make your life hell?
Right. And that can be, I think, probably a bit more tricky with children than necessarily in adults. But we really think about anxiety along a continuum from kind of none to extreme. And there's a certain point that we would say, you know, this may be an anxiety disorder. And what we're looking at there is things like intensity of the reaction, pervasiveness of the reaction. So is that happening every day, or is it kind of a once in a while? We also look at impairment. So would this be impeding the child living the life that they would want to be doing? Is it interfering with their ability to engage in school with their peers, things like that, in a way that they or their family would be hoping that they could do?
Can anyone have a panic attack?
You can have a panic attack if you're in a situation that promotes an intense fear reaction. You can have panic disorder if your panic attacks are occurring at a minimum of twice a week for a prolonged period of time, and it's really getting in the way of things that you value doing.
So lots of people, panic attacks can be quite common in the general population, and that would be, and also across many of the anxiety disorders, you can also have panic attacks. So if you're having a lot of extreme worry, that can build itself up into a panic attack. What's different with panic disorder is more the fear associated with having another panic attack, changing your behavior because of fear of having a panic attack, or help not being able to get to you in case you had a panic attack, and them really occurring kind of out of the blue.
You know what the underlying causes are for anxiety disorders?
Well, there's not one cause, and it's not kind of as simple as that. But with anxiety disorders, as with many other mental difficulties that we think about, we really think about a biopsychosocial model. So,
Sorry?
A biopsychosocial model. And I'll
English,
explain
please?
what that means. So basically, it means contribution from biology. So we know that there is a genetic component to anxiety disorders. If you look, for example, at twin studies where you have two individuals who have the same DNA, we know that there's an elevated risk if one twin has an anxiety disorder. But we also know that it's not necessarily 100%, that if one twin has an anxiety disorder, the other one will also will. So we know it's not entirely genetics. We also know that anxiety disorders can run in families. Typically what happens is if a parent has an anxiety disorder, there's an increased risk for the child to have one of the anxiety disorders, not necessarily a one-to-one relationship.
We heard that over here,
and
didn't
I think
we?
you talked about
that You guys
that
are the poster
too.
children for that,
Yeah.
in some respects.
And we also know that there are some neurochemical changes in the brain associated with anxiety. So the largest one that's been implicated there is serotonin. But we also know that that's also implicated in depression, in eating disorders. So it's not specific to anxiety disorders. So we have that biological piece for sure. For example, for panic disorder, if you have a first-degree relative, you're 8 times more likely to have panic disorder. If the onset was before age 20, you're 20 times more likely to have panic disorder. So there's definitely that biological component. But there's also some other really important components. One of them is your psychology. So looking at things like your personality, your temperament. We know, for example, in social anxiety, and I don't know if you may have noticed this in your daughter, but often there's behavioral inhibition, which is kind of a temperamental style of that inhibition that's often quite, that can happen quite young. And we know that that can sometimes develop into something that would result in social phobia or social anxiety.
Behavioral inhibition meaning what?
Being really withdrawn, timid into exploring new things. I'm seeing a lot of nods there from Darlene. So there's kind of the psychological component, but there's also the societal component. So looking at the society that you're in, the people that you're around, we know that modeling can be a very strong form of learning in terms of the development of anxiety disorders. So I know you were saying that, your mom was trying to hide that, not have it pass through. Sometimes we're better than other times of that happening, and that can be a really powerful learning component. We know that a lot of things that happen with anxiety do have a strong learning component, and the really great thing about that is anything that's learned, you can also unlearn and learn something new, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why the treatments can be so effective for anxiety
Let me
disorders.
pick up on that, treatments. And again, I want to do the comparison to depression, which people perhaps know better. Is treating and presumably, I don't know if curing is the word you use, managing. If treating and managing depression easier or harder in terms of getting success rates than anxiety disorders?
It's a good question. Once again, I'm going to go back to what Darlene and Daniel said. I didn't hear the word cure in their descriptions. I heard the word manage and I heard the word agency, where they start to play more of a role in helping them work skillfully with these anxious emotions and anxious feelings. And I think that that's really the state of the art in treating depression and anxiety. The idea that these things go away permanently once you're able to take the right pill or to take the right treatment is a hoped-for outcome, but it's also a little bit of an illusion. What happens is that you do get this kind of pharmacological blanketing that Daniel described, and that then allows you to engage properly or more effectively with the symptoms that remain, and it's an ongoing encounter, almost like a dance. As the symptoms get stronger, you may need to do a little bit more to look after yourself. If they're relatively quiescent, you probably don't have to work as hard. And in depression and in anxiety, part of what we're finding is that it's better to see these as chronic, long-standing problems that often persist but can be managed and regulated so that people can live lives that are relatively free from them as long as they're able to put some of the effort in. And I would say the same thing with medication, because with medications often people are asked to stay on pharmacotherapy for quite a number of years in order to manage the problems.
Well, Daniel's already told us this is still how do we want to describe it? This is an ongoing thing for you. You certainly don't feel like you've got it licked. Darlene, how about for you? Do you think you've got this licked?
No, I don't think so. And I know for a fact it rises and falls. It's like that cycle, and it depends on what my body's going through. It depends on, for me, I know that a lot of what I struggle with is different triggers for my body. If I've got low iron, or if I've got low thyroid, so I know that there's very huge physical manifestations that can trigger something. So I know that I'm always on the lookout that, my brain says, okay, you know what, maybe something's wrong, and I can justify it, and then I can take that down so it's not so heightened anymore. But I think it's something that I'm going to have to be dealing with for a large part of my life, and that's okay, because it's manageable now, because I'm able to, I don't raise to that frightened level anymore. I can sort of talk it through in my head.
You understand it better now.
Yeah, I understand it, and I'm not so fearful of it because I've talked it through with myself.
On that issue of iron, do you take vitamins every day?
I chose to do the more natural and alternative therapy in treating myself. So I'm working with a naturopath, and I've just figured out some food allergies and sensitivities, actually, that I just stopped eating eggs a week and a half ago. And even that little change in subtlety, I just happen to be a person that tends to feel things very, very strongly. So a
Your body's
small
very sensitive
shift
to that
or
stuff.
change exactly will bring about. So I've taken eggs out, and I've noticed that this whole week I'm not so jittery.
Yeah, but
Like
the Egg Marketing Board is furious with you
I
now.
know. I'm sorry. I'm making other alternative plans, but it's a whole body process too, right? If I'm tired, then that will precipitate something. So I just have to be very conscious of my scheduling as well too, right? And it's an everyday process.
Do you have to watch out for this kind of thing too?
I probably should not drink as much caffeine as I do, or I should probably not drink much in the way of alcohol, because alcohol is kind of like an anxiety boomerang. It makes you feel better in the moment, and then all of a sudden it floods back. But I don't do these things so much.
Okay, this does beg a question.
Well,
I
I like coffee, and I like a cocktail, and
don't you like being sane too?
I do, but I feel sane. I mean, just to go back to what you were talking about a moment ago, I think it's a fallacy to even think of anxiety as something that can be licked. I mean, even people who aren't, whose psychiatrists or psychologists haven't written down an anxiety disorder code and sent it to the insurance company, experience anxiety. It's a necessary thing. It's an emotion. It's not like, dengue fever or pneumonia. It's not something you could eradicate from your being. And I, for one, would like it to be included in the panoply of experiences and emotions that I experience. I'm not looking to eradicate it.
Interesting.
And I'm at the point in my life where I can have a cup or two of coffee, or I can have a cocktail, and this will not exacerbate my anxiety to the extent that it causes an undue impairment in my life, in my functioning.
And you still get pleasure from having the odd coffee and having the odd drink.
Yeah,
presumably.
and frankly, I also get a little bit of pleasure from anxiety if it's moderate, if it's low. I mean, anxiety can be a motivation as much as it can be an impediment to the way you live your life. It can be, it warns you that something is going wrong. That if you're being nervously vigilant in the right circumstances, it's an experience that's valued just like any other. So, I mean, the way I think about anxiety is not in a way that I want to get rid of it, because when I've thought about it in that way, it's made me, ironically, more anxious. It's something like, I need to get rid of this, I need to get it out of my life. It turns into this bugaboo, this monster that there's a recursive experience. It creates more anxiety the more you want it out now, because that in itself is an anxious reaction. So there's a lot of sort of dynamism that goes on with the experience.
Let's just take a brief pause right now, insofar as we're, of course, doing this on television, but we have lots of resources on our website as well, videos, blogs, and so on. And I want to just take a few seconds here to have our control room play a snippet of something we have on the website called Jason's Story. And I think it's self-explanatory. Roll tape, please.
There were times when I really did want to go out and go to a bar and watch sports on the tube with my friends, but even just a social gathering with people I've known since high school, sometimes I couldn't face it. I wanted to see them, but at the same time, I just didn't want them to see me. I didn't want them to see me the way I was. I was ashamed of it. Every single sentence that I spoke, I questioned whether I had put it correctly, whether I had sounded manic, whether I had sounded anything. I was a bundle of nerves wrapped up in self-consciousness.
Okay, that's a small snippet of Jason's story. The rest of it, the entire feature, is on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, so we encourage you, not now, obviously, after we're done here on TV, to go there and check out more on that. But in his case, Judith, let me go to you on this. His father died of cancer when he was just 7 years old. And I wonder whether a very traumatic episode in a young person's life can partially explain, or maybe entirely explain, what he's going through now. What do you think?
I think everyone has a different individual experience in terms of how that fear or anxiety is created, but we know that there are usually kind of three main pathways to the acquisition of fear. One of them is what you're mentioning, having a really traumatic or extremely distressing experience. That's a very powerful learning tool. We also know that observation is also another way of acquiring fear. So if you have someone always showing you by their actions that, you know what, it's dangerous for you to be on the subway, or it's not okay to act that way in front of other people, that can also teach you around anxiety. And the third way is through information. So if you're constantly bombarded with messages that certain things are safe or not safe, so for example, if we think about OCD and germs, there are so many messages around, let's have these cleaners that are 99.9% and it's not okay to be around germs, you can also develop fear pathways that way.
Okay. Daniel, should follow up with you. You got any kids?
I do. I have one child, a daughter.
And given that you are already second generation anxiety, what's the word I should use?
That works, yeah. Legacy anxiety?
Legacy
I don't
anxiety?
know.
Do you have any concerns about your daughter?
Sure I do, yeah.
How old is she?
She's 5.
You seeing anything yet?
I'm a little uncomfortable talking about her just because she has no say in the matter. But I'm certainly concerned about my own parenting and try to make sure that I'm as present as possible, that when I'm experiencing anxiety and I'm around her, I look at her and I kind of try to jump back into myself and say, okay, try to think about this in a new way. I mean, it's the strongest incentive to keep myself steady and mindful that I've ever had.
For what it's worth, I'm glad you just said what you just said, because obviously we're talking about very personal things here today, and you should feel free not to answer any questions which you feel are too intrusive or invade on somebody else's privacy. That's absolutely A-okay here.
And I don't mean to criticize Darlene
No,
for her stance on
Understood.
it.
Understood.
It's a journey, everybody's journey, right?
Yeah.
And now, your older son, right? You have an older son, a younger daughter.
That's right.
It's the daughter who's been experiencing it.
That's right.
The older son, any signs of any of this?
Yeah.
Him too?
Yeah, I think a large part of his struggle over the last little while has been getting through that traumatic part of it. Like you were discussing trauma. We started trauma therapy primarily for him because all of Sydney's early years, all of my daughter's early years were all about her. So in his eyes, the squeaky wheel got the oil, but then what about me? So now now that, her transition is smoother, and as she's growing and gaining more confidence, all of a sudden, hey, what about me? So all of those things that we didn't manage to deal with, not knowing, but we just couldn't. We were in the moment and getting through what we could get through. Now all of a sudden it's sort of his turn to kind of deal with all of his issues. So it's very different. They've got very different anxiety issues, but yeah.
Zindel, I want to follow up with this. I'm imagining right now that there are, let's say, grandparents watching this discussion and who are thinking, we didn't have these problems in our day, but we know a lot more now, and we've identified a lot more now, and so we have a lot more information about all of this stuff. But for those who might be watching this and thinking, what's wrong with this generation? Why don't they just suck it up like we did? What would you say?
Well, I think that, there are attitudes that each generation comes to when it involves dealing with taboo topics. And so I think mental health now is less of a taboo topic than it was 2 or 3 generations ago. And so the more we start to shed light on these difficulties, the more we're able to see their presence in our cohort. It doesn't mean that they didn't exist back then. I just think that it meant less of a willingness to talk about it, and that the attitudes developed around those manifestations when they appeared were very much, as Darlene said, suck it up, just pull up your socks and get on with it, so that there wasn't really very much attention devoted to it.
Let me one follow-up here. You say it's not like these things didn't exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Are you sure about that? Because I suspect there would be people who say society today is just so different, so much more complicated, so many more screens, so much more radioactivity, so much more everything, that this may be a modern phenomenon and something that wasn't as prevalent 100 years ago. Is that right?
Well, I think if you look at the epidemiology, you need to ask the question, what is core and what is derivative? Now, core might be the unchanging rate of mental disorders in the population. And the same argument's been made with depression. Maybe as our societies become more alienating, more isolating, depression rates go up because people feel like they're falling off the cliff. But I think that there is a phenomenon where the more we're able to recognize, diagnose, and the more possibly marketing from pharmaceutical companies around the need to treat anxiety disorders, the more we're starting to recognize them in doctors' offices and all over. But I think that the core rates for anxiety haven't really changed that much. It's just that their detection rates have increased, and so it seems now that they're all over the place.
Okay. I should raise one thing here, forgive me, because I keep this thing in my ear so that the control room can talk to me from time to time, and the producer of this program, Sandra Jonas, has just whispered in my ear, well, whispered is not the right word. She has said, you are starting to talk about tomorrow night's program, and if you continue down this road, I will hurt you. So, we are going to stop this conversation because I don't want to take away from tomorrow night's program. And frankly, I want to stay as healthy as I can. And I want to get us back on track here for a segment that we're going to call Keep Calm and Carry On. Daniel, when your anxiety is particularly bad, how functional are you or not?
I am outwardly as functional as I am when I'm completely calm. Relative, and I don't know if completely calm has ever existed in my life, but what passes for complete calm. I've learned that despite the anxiety, I'm able to do the things that I need to do. I'm able to drop my daughter off at school and finish this assignment or teach a class.
Even in the midst of an anxiety attack?
I mean, just out of sheer necessity, yeah. It feels as if I'm doing a terrible job and that I'm never going to get through it, but I always do. It's like doing what I usually do, but with alarm bells going off in my head. But I am able to do it. I never sort of get to a moment, and some people probably do, I know they do, but I never sort of shut down and become paralyzed.
But do you think other people can tell?
I think that well, I teach college, and I said to the students, and I'm teaching a class now on literature and mental health, mental illness, and said to the students, you know, I come in sometimes and I'm a mess and there's something going on in my life and you can't tell. And one of the students said, oh, yes, we can. Ah. So I thought that I was performing normality quite well. And usually I can. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, you know, I never knew that you struggled with anxiety. Because I put on a mask, especially in college, I put on a mask of kind of confidence or even aggression or anger. A lot of times when you encounter someone who's hostile or angry, it's usually coming out of anxiety, out of fear. And I've done a very good job over the years of learning how to perform poise, non-anxiety. Even when I'm inside, it's like, you know, the inside of a volcano.
When they say you think you're hiding this from us, but we actually can't tell, do you know what manifestations they're picking up on that indicate something's going on?
I suspect it's a sort of distractedness. I mean, if you start to think about anxiety and spend time around anxious people, you can detect the signs, the fidgets, the slight glistening and you know, where there are sweat glands, the chewing of the nails, the kind of, you know, moving around a lot, maybe repeating yourself, getting a little abstracted and kind of looking off. You can see it if you become practiced at looking at the signs. And maybe this student who said that just knew what the signs were, or maybe she was trying to unsettle me. But I'm going to give her, I'm giving her a D in the class.
You're giving her a D anyway. I gather when you asked your brother why you weren't getting any better, this is taking you back, he said, it's because you're an idiot. And you saw wisdom in that.
I did see wisdom in that.
Explain.
Well, it gets back to what I was saying about habit and what I've learned about habit. What I was asking him was not exactly why I'm not getting better, but that at this point in my life, in my mid-30s, I know very well what works for me. I know the things that if I do them habitually, regularly, they would diminish my anxiety. But then I get to the point where I don't do them anymore because maybe I'm feeling better, or maybe I get distracted, or I get complacent. And what he meant was, I said to him, why, if I know what helps, don't I do it? And he said, because you're an idiot. What he was trying to say, I think, or maybe he was just actually calling me an idiot. It's entirely possible. There's precedence for that. As well.
Let's assume there was a more constructive.
Let's assume it's not always with Scott. It's not always something you can assume. But what he meant, I think, was human beings forget. We have a much ballyhooed intelligence. Our brains we talked about it a lot as this wonderful instrument, but we also tend to become complacent and to forget that just because we're feeling better doesn't mean we can stop. With anxiety, I mean, the metaphor I've come to think of it is it's like the Oregon Trail, the pioneers going across the country, and the more these wagon trains went across the country, these deep sort of packed earth tracks in the ground. That's what my brain is like with anxiety. It'll always go there. So the task is every day to carve new paths, every day, because if I don't for a week or a month, the wagon wheels will slip right back into those old ruts. And it's only an idiot, my brother was saying, who doesn't remember that, who doesn't look back at the 20 years of anxiety and see the evidence, which is don't stop ever until you're gone. Every day, do what you need to do. And so I think he was just trying to jolt me back.
He loves you. He says that out of love, of course.
Yes, and he also knows that he shares the same idiocy and the same, a lot of the same anxiety, and that he gets to the point where he stops doing the things that help.
Right.
And then there you are, back in the old situation you were in.
Let me ask you the same question. When you're undergoing an episode, how functional are you?
Oh, I'm not. I'm better now. But in, a couple of years ago, you could tell, and just kind of like what you were saying, very distinct factors and very distinct symptoms happen with me. I start to pace when those moments and that feeling starts to come along. I start to pace. And then, of course, all of those what ifs start to come to play. So I get very quiet. I'm like a book. You can read it on my face and on every part of my body. And it used to debilitate me from leaving the house. It doesn't now. So now I've got that internal dialogue to look back on other experiences to say, you know what, you can do this because I know you've done it before, and let's just give it a try. And I think the best factor for me has always been thinking and reminding myself that there's always choices. So even though I'm in this moment of sheer panic and utter turbulence, there's always a choice. If I was really debilitated by something, I could make an alternate choice. Not that I want to, but just even in knowing that and in telling myself that there's always a choice, that struggle doesn't seem to be as hard.
Let me go back over and in our remaining moments on the other side of the table, just find out what works in terms of dealing with issues like this. Judith, if you're looking for pharmacological choices, I guess there's Xanax, there's Prozac, is this the kind of stuff you prescribe in situations like this?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't prescribe. It would be the first
Not you,
one.
but
yes.
what one would do?
What one would do. Usually the first line treatment for anxiety disorders would be an SSRI. So that's something, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that works on the serotonin system. There's several of them. Prozac would be one of them. Often with anxiety disorders, we have to start at a bit of a lower dosage sometimes because often people with anxiety disorders are very sensitive to the side effects that can happen. But ultimately, you often tend to go to a higher dose than what you would with depression. So the SSRIs are typically the first line. We also know that things like Xanax, Ativan, the benzodiazepine class of medications is also something that is used. Typically, that tends to be more in terms of kind of having immediate symptom relief. So for example, if I'm deathly afraid of going on a plane or having a dentist visit, that's something that I may take once to be able to get through that situation, as opposed to that being a really ongoing, everyday thing. There are some cases where that is quite effective to have the benzodiazepine on more of that use, but usually it's more immediate relief as opposed to a long-term solution.
Is a pharmacological option usually the first approach to finding a solution?
If it is, it's because most of the anxiety disorders are treated in primary care. And in primary care, the amount of time and the approach taken is often to provide a pharmacological effort to reduce symptoms. And the other ancillary approaches, such as therapies, talk therapies,
Cognitive behavior
cognitive
therapy?
therapy, are a little bit harder to access in the community, and they're also not always available at frontline treatments.
But are they the preferred choice?
Well, in terms of the empirical data, they are as effective as the pharmacological options. They have the added benefit that people who use them learn how to become their own therapists. I think we've heard a lot about that from Darlene and Daniel in a very compelling way, that you spend time with the therapist, but then there's the point at which you need to do this work for yourself so that the anxiety can be worked with either through exposure, through asking yourself some of these questions, to reminding yourself of options and work that you've done in the past.
I would wonder, though, that if you are, in some respects, as you put it, in charge of your own care, whether the patient might make some bad choices, as in, I'm going to get to the bottom of this by going on a binge or going on a bender or substance abuse or whatever. How common is that?
It's actually quite common, and it's called self-medication, which really means that people are using other substances to dampen the feelings of fear and the symptoms of anxiety. And it works. And sometimes it can be over-the-counter medication, sometimes it can be alcohol, but it works in a very short-term way, which leaves the person really back to square one when they have to deal with these things over and over again. And one of the things that we know about anxiety is that it's persistent and that it can grow. Initially to start to wall off a small part of your life, but the more that it starts to take over, more and more of your life is then saturated with this fear, less and less of your life is available for real living.
And just finally, you know, of course everybody here knows about Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking. It's been around for, I don't know, half a century, maybe even longer. And maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to be making a bit of a comeback these days. And I know you're going to tell me there's probably nothing scientific to hang your hat on to show that that actually works. But do you think there's any substance to it at all?
Maybe in the boardroom, but I'm not sure in the consulting room. I think people have a saturation level for listening to illness, disorders, and problems. And positive psychology, I think, provides the idea that you can pull yourself out of that by focusing on more of the affirming and enhancing attitudes and things like that. But I'm skeptical because there is no empirical evidence, and also because it might be that those kinds of practices are better situated once people are already feeling well. Once they want to sustain well-being and recovery, that might be a good thing to focus on. But when you're dealing with panic attacks, when you're pacing, when you're double checking and triple checking every decision you've made, I find that the positive psychology runs out of runway quite quickly, and what you need to get back to are the basics of exposure, tolerating difficult affects and emotions, and just continuing to do the hard work that'll eventually pay off.
I want to thank all four of you for coming in tonight and helping us out with this. This was really quite illuminating. Daniel Smith, Monkey Mind, a memoir of anxiety, if you want to read more of his experience. Darlene Wiersky-DeVoe also was with an organization called Parents for Children's Mental Health. We thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And on the other side of the table, Judith Laposa, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. Zindel Siegel, also with CAMH, and we thank you for sharing your expertise from a somewhat different perspective on this topic as well.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.